Senator Back.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President. What is it that people don't get? What is it about people who have never been in or run or paid up for the management and the establishment and the conduct of a business that people don't get? Investment equals jobs. Investment equals productivity. Investment equals production. It equals improved jobs. It equals higher skilled jobs. And for a country that relies so heavily on export, investment encourages export. We are a country of 24 million people, the area, the population of Greater New York, and yet we live in a country the size of continental America, with the exception of Alaska. Does anybody ever ask themselves, how is it per capita that Australia and Australians are so wealthy, where we've got the population of New York in the landmass of America? It is because of investment, Acting Deputy President. Not one of us would be in this place if it hadn't been for the forethought and the risk-taking and the investment by people before us. And in my own case, I can speak over 40 years of taking risk, of mortgaging a home, of shifting states and investing. Why, Acting Deputy President? Because I was encouraged by the climate in this country to invest, and in so doing expanded my business activities, and in so doing employed more people, improved profitability, improved export opportunities, enhanced Australia's reputation internationally, and indeed increased the skill level of people who have worked for me. What is it that we don't get about investment? And you hear people saying overseas investment, multinational investment. Acting Deputy President, if there hadn't been overseas investment in 1788, there would be no European settlement in this country. It is absolutely beyond me why people don't understand the value and the benefit of investment. Why do people invest? One, because they see an opportunity. Two, they measure up the risk to decide whether or not the opportunity is worth exploring. Three, they have either got or they can put a case to a bank, and they seek investment to be able to establish that business and to employ people and to expand and to develop the skill sets of those people and to invest in technology or machinery or whatever the nature of the business is. But one of the biggest issues, Acting Deputy President, is the taxation regime attendant upon that company. I will address in my contribution the ease and speed, and Senator Whish-Wilson of all people knows the ease and speed with which capital can move around the world. But let me give you the best and most current example I can. When the mining tax was introduced by the Labor Party, prior to its introduction, the level of mining exploration investment by ASX-registered companies in Australia, Acting Deputy President, 65% of their activity was in Australia and 35% was overseas. Within 1 year, not 10, not 15, no long term, within 1 year, when the risk of a mining tax was attendant upon them, do you know how that changed? It changed from 65% exploration in Australia to 35%. It reversed. In that first year alone, investment by ASX-registered companies changed from 65 to 35%. And so you say, well, why can't Australia retain the high tax level it has got? Well, you've only got to look at where else it is possible for Australian companies, let alone multinational companies, to invest their funds. In Singapore, Acting Deputy President, what is the corporate tax rate? It is 17%, the same flying time from my home city of Perth to Singapore as my home city of Perth across here. And Senator Smith and I desperately hope it won't be long before we get on such a plane to go home. 5 hours! 5 hours! Isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing that people who probably have never ever invested in a business of their own are yelling out at me because I am trying to outline to this chamber and to the people of Australia where the benefit and the value of investment lies. Acting Deputy President, I will treat these interjections with the disdain they deserve, and I will go on to explain to you the level of taxation now in the United Kingdom, a country that's about to leave the EU and a country with which we could well be once again increasing our levels of trade back to those prior to the British joining the EU. And those from Tasmania, how would they not remember how that tremendous trade in fruit, particularly including apples, collapsed when the British joined the EU. So what's their level of taxation? 24%, Acting Deputy President. We know, for example, that should this Trump administration be successful, they will reduce their levels of corporate tax to 20%. Who wants to... I just find it incredible. A man who himself was so tied up in the world of international finance, who knows very, very well that what companies do when they make money beyond paying tax, they reinvest that money into their business, with business opportunity and expansion. Senator Wilson himself has done that. He's an example of that business success. I am at a loss to understand why his principles have changed the way they have. And I'm sure the day will come when I am given the opportunity to sample some of the product from his enterprise. But let me concentrate for a moment, if I can, Acting Deputy President, on small business in this country. The engine room, as we all know. Over 3 million workers employed in small business in Australia and contributing $340 billion to our economy. Why do I want to contrast small business with that of large business? Simply because when you look at stability of employment, you need look no further than the global financial crisis. And what happened with big business at and following the GFC, Acting Deputy President? They reduced staff numbers considerably, and yet it was small business in this country that retained and maintained their levels of workforce. And as they came out of the global financial crisis, we know what is always going on. The entrepreneurial small business person in a region, in a town, in the city, wherever, who wants to invest in increasing that business activity. It's the DNA of people in business to want to expand that business activity. And we know that you do need that level of stability in an economy, but you also need a competitive tax rate. Why would you do business in Australia if you can do an equivalent rate of business in Singapore, where you're paying 17% in contrast to paying 30%? It is absolutely important that we create a more level playing field. And in response to the comment that Senator Wilson made because he and I both know something of the economies of the United States of America. And we both know in that jurisdiction there is a federal tax and there is a state tax. In the case of California, where I resided and worked, the rate of state tax was about the same as federal tax. Higher taxes, five taxes. In the state of Texas, Acting Deputy President, there is no state tax. Yes, they earn their revenue on charging higher rates of residential and investment land, but there is no state tax. Have a look at the economy of Texas at the moment in contrast to that of California, where many of the cities and the counties of California are actually either bankrupt or near it. I go back to, in relation to the United States, I've mentioned United Kingdom, whose corporate tax rates have gone down from 30% in 2008 to 20% in 2015. Over the period 2008 to 2014, Madam Deputy President, Canada reduced its main corporate rate from an average of 36 to 26, and Singapore, as I have mentioned, have reduced theirs down to 17% from 20%. I want to make some comments, if I may, about the security of activity and what the multinationals and others are saying, the big end of town now. It was only on Wednesday night of this week that Professor Ian Harper from Deloitte Access Economics, at the 50th anniversary of the Minerals Council, launched the Executive Summary of Mining and Mining Equipment and Technology Services in Australia. And I want to put on the record the scale of mining and mining technology in this country, because they are new figures which Deloitte Access Economics, using figures from the Tax Office, the Reserve Bank and others, have calculated. And this is quoting from that report. The total economic contribution of Australia's mining and mining equipment and technology sector in 15-16 was just under $240 billion, representing 15% of the Australian economy, and it supported a total of 1.139 million FTE equivalent jobs, somewhere around 10% of the Australian workforce. But let me tell you what Professor Harper and his team have recognised as being the limits. What might limit or reduce mining activity in this country? And of course, one of those particularly important is the fact of a competitive and fair taxation system. As Harper in his report says, to ensure that Australia's corporate taxation rate and other mining-related taxes are stable and competitive relative to other economies, upholding good economic principles in setting taxation policy, especially in respect of taxing business inputs. Openness to foreign investment, he speaks of. Efficient approaches to regulation. I mention again 1.14 million jobs out of the mining sector in this country. Do we really want to see that level of investment reduced? Do we really want to see that being exported offshore? Remembering, as Senator Smith knows only too well, that the entire mining activity of Africa is serviced and managed principally out of Western Australian hard rock mining companies. The African leaders coming to Choggum in 2013 realised, in speaking to the then Premier of Western Australia, that the management of the entire mining industries in their countries was managed from within 1 kilometre of his office in West Perth. So don't think for 1 minute there's not the capacity to be able to move that level of investment elsewhere. I come secondly to another project related to investment and the importance of taxation, and it is the $100 billion projects by Chevron on Barrow Island in offshore Western Australia, Gorgon, and at Onslow, the Wheatstone project. And let me tell you again, already the first 2 trains of Gorgon, trains being the LNG activities, 2 of 3 are already producing, Madam Deputy President, and are already earning massive amounts of export wealth for this country. And by the end of next year, all 5, 3 on Gorgon, 2 on Wheatstone, will be producing. There will be a ship leaving Western Australia every 40 hours for the next 30 years from that project, subject to us being able to ensure a safe and profitable investment climate. And if I can just share with the chamber, and these are figures from Acel Allen Consultants, the prediction from just those 2 projects is that they will contribute more than $1 trillion to Australia's GDP, 150,000 full-time equivalent jobs, and $340 billion to the federal revenue of Australia over that time, besides the incredible upskilling, besides the exporting also of highly skilled Australian workers who have developed technologies that are so valuable. But once again, I go to the conclusion of the Managing Director, Mr Nigel Hearn, in a speech only last week, Madam Deputy President, and what, of course, he says is this: Australia can be the world's best producer and supplier of natural gas. We can lead the country in responsible development, in provision of reliable and affordable energy, facilitating internationally competitive policy settings. But what he also goes on to say is that we must have a competitive taxation regime so that there will be continued inflow of capital to this country. We have already seen a decision by BP, a company that's been investing heavily in Australia for close to 100 years, the big BP refinery in Western Australia, as Senator Smith and I well know, provides all of the refined product in the west side of the country, have already made a decision that they are not going to proceed with exploration in the Great Australian Bight. Fortunately, Chevron is so minded, as a result of $100 billion of investment to date, that they are going to proceed with exploration in the Bight, which they say could well be a very, very prospective operation indeed. Madam Deputy President, I just come back to the point I made at the beginning of this contribution. What is it that people do not get about the need to have attractive investment incentives? We want jobs. We want people to invest in jobs. We want people to invest in skilling of those. You know as well as I do, Madam Deputy President, we have the new exciting Shell Prelude. The largest vessel ever built is completing its construction in Korea to be placed, I believe, on the Jants field offshore Western Australia, the floating LNG. We've got to continue to encourage investment, but we will not encourage investment if we've got a tax rate of 30%, when those with whom we compete are already down at 24 or 22, heading to 20, or in the case of Singapore, 17. Why would a company do all of its expansion and all of its development and all of its marketing out of Australia if our tax rates at the corporate level are 30%, when one of the largest fuel industry logistics hubs in the world, in Singapore, charges 17%. I ask people who are opposed to this legislation to think very carefully, because you are limiting the future of jobs for yourselves, for your children, for your grandchildren and for the well-being of this country.
Thank you.